I know that when I was job searching, a lot of people I knew were getting jobs because they had all these connections and I had nothing. But I think one thing that helped me get my job is the fact that Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maylene Call from Miss Call's Campers. I'm a teacher in Tennessee and today I want to talk about interview tips. I personally know how intimidating interviews can be, especially, you know, if you're not a good public speaker or you're full of nerves. I experienced both of those things and I actually filmed a reaction video to my very first teaching interview, so you can click right up here to watch. But I want you to know that most people are experiencing exactly what you're experiencing. You are not alone. A lot of people go in with a lot of nerves. I know I shake when I get nervous, my voice shakes. Just remember that no matter what happens in the interview, even if you think it went terrible, it's still going to be a learning experience for you, and you never know what can happen. You don't know what schools are looking for. That's kind of the kicker. So it's important to just be yourself in an interview. Just know that you have worked so hard, you are capable, and you deserve to be there. And I'm going to give you some other tips to help get you through it. Tip number one is to be yourself, and I touched on this a little bit, and I know it is just so overdone, but being yourself is going to be one of the biggest factors that gets you your job. If you wow them with your personality, no matter what your personality is, they're going to want to hire you. They want to see how you fit into their school. And so it's okay if you're not, you know, the most outspoken person in the whole wide world. It's okay if you're a little bit more reserved. Whoever you are, just own it. So before you go into your interview, you definitely are going to want to gather your thoughts. And I mean, before the day of, you want to definitely practice some interview questions so you can kind of get a feel for how you would react in an interview to those questions. You can do this by yourself by just Googling questions. You can have a friend Google questions for you. But my big tip is to film yourself. Filming yourself is actually really helpful. I know that when I was student teaching, a lot of the lessons I did, I wanted to film myself so I could see what I looked like in front of the class. You can kind of get a feel for what you look like when you're just talking to people. Do you smile naturally when you talk to people? Is that something that you maybe need to work on? Do you speak too quick? Do you talk too slow? There's lots of things that you can realize just from filming yourself. Some questions that you should definitely prepare for. As much as we hate it, the question, tell me about yourself. They're not trying to figure out how much you love your dog. They're trying to see how you fit in to their school. So answering this question, it's so important for you to give them information that's going to help them picture you in their school. Tell them what that special something is that you have that you can bring to their school and their culture and make it a better place. They will probably ask you the hard questions, like the discipline questions, classroom management questions, you know, what if situations. And I know those can be hard, especially if you have never taught in your own classroom before and you're relying solely on your student teaching experience. But you've got to prepare some kind of answer for those difficult questions because they could possibly make or break your interview. You have to tell them something about your disciplinarian style or whatever approach you take to discipline and managing behaviors in your classroom, because they are just going to happen. There is not a classroom in the world that can prevent it from happening. You can build amazing community, but you do have to have some kind of plan in place for those behaviors that arise. So it's really important that you can share that in a way that is reflective of who you are as a teacher and how you want your classroom community to be. The next thing that I recommend that you do is put together a teaching portfolio. I had this in my very first interview for a reference, and it made me feel so much better just having that there, because what it is basically a snapshot of who you are as a teacher. So, you know, your best lessons that you did, and if you're a student teacher, it's okay if you only have a couple of them. I recommend putting real photos into it. That way they can actually see what you look like in a classroom. I think that is so powerful. You just want to showcase your teaching as much as possible, and if you can reference that in your interview, it'll definitely help you stand out. What I did was I took my teaching portfolio in kind of like a nicer binder. It was like a leather kind of binder, and then I actually got document covers and made copies of my teaching portfolio to hand out to people, and you can even hand these out at job fairs or whatever you need. But having a teaching portfolio is really going to help you, for one, gather your thoughts about who you are as a teacher, and it's going to help you sell yourself. The very last thing I recommend you do before your interview is do your research on the school. And everybody says this, but it's so important that you take it seriously. Search them on Google, find their class class website, find their district website, find videos if they have videos on YouTube, find their Twitter if they have a Twitter, or I don't know, do schools have Instagrams? I don't know, but do as much research as you can beforehand, because this will help you know if you're gonna be a good fit for this school, and it will also help you know what questions to ask them. What more do you want to know about their school? Having those questions planned before is gonna help you during the interview, because it shows that you care about their school. I know in my interview for the school I'm at now, I referenced some of the things I saw online because I was really curious about them, and you know, I was already incredibly interested in my school, and having those questions kind of helped me figure out if they were a good match for me. The teaching interview process goes both ways. They're trying to see if you're a good fit for them, but you really need to see if that school is somewhere you want to be. Are they the kind of people that you want to work with? Is it the school environment that you would like? So think about those questions, think about what's important to you before you go into the interview. That way you can find out. So during the interview, it is so important to smile, and that is why I recommend filming yourself, because you can see if you smile or if you kind of sit there with a straight face like this, and it makes the biggest difference in the whole wide world. I know a lot of people tell you even when you get the call for your interview, smile when you're talking, because it changes the way your voice sounds, which sounds silly, but it's true, it does. I want to remind you again to be yourself during the interview. If you are not a super bubbly person, you don't have to sit there and like grin full on for them the whole interview. Just be yourself, but make sure you come off as approachable. When they're actually asking you questions is when it can kind of feel overwhelming. I know looking back, it almost feels kind of like a blur, like you're having an out-of-body experience. It might feel like things are moving really quickly, but it's super important to make sure that you actually understand the question they're asking you. It's okay if you need to take a couple of seconds to gather your thoughts. It feels like a long time, but those couple of seconds might make the big difference in your answer. Usually interviews are over, you know, before you know it, so it's really important that you don't come off as flustered in your interview. So take deep breaths during your interview to relax yourself. For me, I tend to talk quickly when I get flustered, but you don't want to come off flustered or rushed. So take deep breaths, slow yourself down, and really think about what you want them to know. You should also remember that this is your time. You can ask them questions throughout the entire interview. You don't need to wait until the very end to ask your questions. In fact, if you do, they might seem a little bit irrelevant at that point. But I like to think of interviews more as conversations, and if you think of it more of a conversation rather than an interview, it might help you. You can ask questions that you planned ahead of time, or you can ask questions that you think of on the spot, whatever feels most natural to you. But I think it's really important to show them that you're interested and that you're a person too. So sitting there for me personally and just answering question after question after question does not sound like a fun old time. You don't need to be sitting there answering question. You know, they have a little bit of time there for you that they've dedicated to you, so make the most of it. Make sure that you seem like an approachable person and not a question answering robot, I guess. I don't know. My next tip is to take notes. So usually, you know, you go in with something, some kind of binder or portfolio, but have a little piece of paper that you can take notes on during the interview, just so you don't forget anything later. And again, in the interview, this can be really hard to think about because your mind is just going 1,000 different directions, but it's okay to just take a second while you gather your thoughts and just jot something down that'll help you remember it later. And speaking of your portfolio, if you have one with you, reference it. They're not gonna see that pretty binder in front of you and think, wow, she has it all together, or wow, he has it all together. You have to show them who you are. Another big tip I have for you is not to wait for them to ask you that golden question. You know, most of us go into an interview wanting to share something that's really gonna shine the light on who we are as a teacher, and if at all possible, try to work that in to another question. Don't wait for them to ask you a question that's never gonna come up. Whatever it is you're proud of, find a way to work that into your interview. Just incorporate it wherever you can. This is about selling yourself. So if you have something big that you want to share with them, work it into a question instead of waiting for a question that they might not ask. Of course, it is super important to make eye contact with every single person in the room. When I was student teaching and I had my first interview, there were like, I think 7 people in the room, a lot of people. But then when I had the interview for the job I'm currently at, it was just my principal and my vice principal. So it just depends, but make eye contact with every single person, Smile at every single person. Don't just put on a show for, you know, the principal or the assistant principal. Make sure you're talking to every single person in that room because they probably play a big role in deciding whether or not you are going to get the opportunity to teach with them. And don't forget to bring water to your interview. I did this and did not have second thoughts about it, and I needed it so much in my interview. My mouth tends to get dry when I am either nervous or when I'm talking a lot, so it's okay. Bring some water in. Who knows? If you're at a really nice school, maybe they'll just like offer you beverages, but just to be safe, bring water. And I recommend bringing water with a straw. I know that sounds weird, but that way you're not like chugging. There's less chance of spilling. Trust me, I'm a clumsy person. I get it. So yeah, water with a straw. When your interview is over, make sure you know, before you walk out, make sure you know when you can expect to hear back from them. It is not a crazy or unusual question to ask. Most of the time they're gonna tell you, but if they, for some reason, forgot to mention it, just ask them, when can I expect to hear back from you? That's a great question to ask at the end when they ask you if you have questions. So figure out when you're gonna hear back and any next steps that you need to take for them. And also, one of the big things is to thank them for their time, and I mean genuinely thank them. Shake hands with them and every single person in the room, and then after the interview, of course, send them a thank you letter or a thank you email. Okay, coming in closer because I just want to talk to you guys. I know that interviews, they can be so intimidating. You go in thinking that you need to be perfect, but you know, even people who have perfect interviews still don't get the job. And it's not because it is so hard to get a teaching job, which it can be, and there are so many people out there who don't have teaching jobs right now that definitely deserve it. But just know that it doesn't matter about having the most perfect interview or about having connections to the school. I know that when I was job searching, a lot of people I knew were getting jobs because they had all these connections, and I had nothing except at the school that I student taught at. I didn't know anybody that worked in other schools that could get me in on the interview. I just had myself. But I think one thing that helped me get my job is the fact that I can show anybody who asks how passionate I am about teaching and how much it matters to me. So one of the biggest tips I can give you is to show them your heart, show them who you are. We all have degrees. You know, our babies, they need a good teacher, but they also need to just be loved. If you teach little, you know, preschoolers, if you teach first graders like me, if you teach middle school, if you teach high school, you just need to love them. So I wish you all the best in your interview. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them down below. And if you are an interview pro, let us know your tips.